The Wikipedia definition of shelter in place uses American Red Cross language. Quote, select a small interior room with few or no windows and take refuge there. It was crafted for the accidental release of chemicals, biologicals, or radiation. I'm really glad our rules are more liberal. But just how relaxed are they? It does seem like there are slightly different rules in different locations. And everyone has questions. I am your host, Dan Lawson. Welcome to Take Notice. With us today is the Honorable David Pine, Supervisor of San Mateo County, District 1. Supervisor Pine is a member of San Mateo County Board of Supervisors Ad Hoc Committee on the COVID-19 response. Welcome back to Take Notice, Supervisor Pine.
Thanks, Dan. Great to be with you.
Supervisor Pine, you were there on day one when the 6 Bay Area counties met even before the shelter-in-place order was put in place by Governor Gavin Newsom. How did that come about?
Well, that was quite a dramatic point in time. And the main actor in that was the county health officer down in Santa Clara County. Santa Clara County had seen the very first cases of COVID. And that prior weekend, the Saturday the 14th, she decided to call 5 other county health officers and talk about putting a shelter-in-place order in place. So they did that over the course of the weekend, and on Monday it was announced, and on Monday at midnight we had the full shelter-in-place underway, which was the first in the nation.
Wow, congratulations. Well, what was the role of the Board of Supervisors in preparing the shelter-in-place order?
Yeah, it's a very interesting environment for policymaking because under the law, during a pandemic such as this, the health officers of the county are empowered to make these decisions. So the order that was crafted was put together by these 6 health officers from each county, really without consulting with elected officials. So it's a very different sort of policy-making regime than we typically have. And the health officers are given tremendous powers under the law. They can have quarantines, they can ration, they can commandeer property, they can put in place curfews. They are given tremendous power to act quickly. And they did just that by putting in place the shelter-in-place order.
Well, that's very interesting. Thanks for the clarification on that. Well, what have been some of the more controversial provisions of the shelter-in-place order?
Well, the ones that we hear a lot about include gardening. People on the peninsula typically have gardeners, and they are prohibited from working during the shelter-in-place order. So that one comes up all the time. Another has been construction. The shelter-in-place order allows some types of construction. For example, you can build housing projects that have a affordable housing component, but you can't do market-based construction, or you can't do remodels, for example. So there's a lot of questions and controversy about how that line was drawn. And then also, the San Mateo County order has a unique provision which says you should not travel more than 5 miles outside of your home unless you have an essential reason for doing that. So we put that in place to try to prevent all the congestion of crowds down at the beaches, which we have seen on when the weather is nice, and actually could potentially see this weekend. So those are ones that often come up.
Good. So the follow-up question is, how is the shelter-in-place enforced then? Or is it?
Well, the shelter-in-place, by law, citizens are required to comply, and failure to comply, is a misdemeanor. For the most part, we rely on people to do the right thing and have not been terribly heavy-handed in the enforcement. But the county sheriffs and the police departments around the peninsula will intervene if they see people, say, gathering in a park to play basketball or, violating the order. The most part, though, we have not been issuing citations. Now, one exception would be, I know last weekend, for example, getting back to the coast side, Pacifica Police Department gave an awful lot of tickets for people who were, parking and trying to make their way to the beach. So it's been a relatively soft touch. And in our county, compliance has really been remarkable. It's interesting. There's data from mobile phones that has been collected that shows kind of where people go and don't go. And that data suggests we're doing a pretty good job.
That's good to hear. So some assert that their constitutional rights and individual freedoms are violated by shelter-in-place orders. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting legal issue, because this has come up a couple times. For example, people will, want to gather for religious purposes, or gather to protest the shelter-in-place order. Or gun owners feel very strongly that gun stores should remain open under the Second Amendment. So there have been some court battles over this, and for the most part, the courts have respected the shelter-in-place orders. But it is a point of tension that is kind of unavoidable. Now, I know here in this county, we do have a handful of gun stores, and some have remained open on a limited basis. This caused a great deal of controversy, because under the order, they should not be opened. Then the question becomes, how much of a fight do you want to take on during the middle of this crisis? So the health of the community is paramount, and so long as the shelter in place is modest, relatively modest in length, I think the courts would continue to give deference to the shelter in place orders.
And I did see most recently the CHP is not issuing permits anymore, at least for Sacramento, for protests or any kind of public demonstration.
Yeah, I saw that headline as well, and it really goes to the crux of this issue, because what's a fundamental right, under the Constitution than to protest or voice your political opinion? And the court was saying, well, you want to voice it, do it online, don't do it by gathering in front of the Capitol.
Right.
So yeah, perfect example of how the law has to balance these rights.
Right. Now to the mask issue. And early in the COVID-19 crisis, wearing face masks outside of a healthcare setting was discouraged. Well, now for the most part, masks are required outside of the home. What changed?
Yeah, there was definitely an about face with the masks. So, early on, the health experts were emphasizing that wearing masks outside of a hospital or healthcare setting was unnecessary and in fact, potentially detrimental, because by wearing a mask, you might have a false sense of security, or you'll touch your face more, and it was discouraged. But later, what the health experts really learned or really started to focus on is so much of the COVID-19 is spread through people who are so-called asymptomatic. So many of us right now watching this show, may have the virus, but don't know it. So by wearing a mask, we will not spread it to someone else. And so the health officers, again, realizing that so many people are asymptomatic, said, you're all going to have to wear masks so you don't spread it. Actually, that's an interesting point, too, on cases. Everyone's very interested in how many cases. We're moving up to around 1,000 reported cases in the county. But, the researchers think that there could be 20,000, 30,000. The reported cases are just a fraction of the number of people who actually have the virus.
Great. Well, now on to questions from viewers. So our first question is from Shari. Shari asks, is there a rough estimate of how many lives have been saved as a result of our county's relatively early and robust adoption of social distancing practices?
Yeah, I don't think anyone could give you a precise number, but there's no question that the early implementation of a shelter-in-place order by San Mateo County and 5 other counties in the Bay Area saved thousands of lives. Just contrast what we've experienced compared to New York, for example, which they put their shelter-in-place order later. And one thing that is important to keep in mind is when the crisis was first emerging, like every day really mattered. In fact, every hour really mattered. So although we were only 3 or 4 days ahead of the rest of the state, those days made an enormous amount of difference. So yeah, I'm really proud of the way the Bay Area showed leadership in taking that big action.
Well done. Well, Gretchen would like to know, where is San Mateo County on the progression chart? Have we peaked yet? Are we on the downside of the peak?
Well, the data is, looking good right now. The most important thing that we're tracking is the number of hospitalizations, because early on, our fear, of course, was that our hospitals would not have the capacity to handle all the cases, and we have not. We think we're over the peak in terms of hospitalizations. So again, the data is looking very good. But as I said earlier, the number of cases, don't be surprised if you hear about many more thousands of cases because of so many people being asymptomatic, and there's not an easy way to get tested right now. So as testing becomes more available, we'll see the case number rise. So the number that really matters is how many people are being hospitalized, and we're looking pretty good on that metric as we speak.
Very good to hear. Well, Joe asks, my parent is in an assisted living facility in the county. What steps is the county health department taking to ensure that these facilities are adopting all recommended practices to safeguard their residents, including shelter in place?
And the health of our seniors is paramount because the virus has such an impact on older people. When we look at the number of people who have passed away during this crisis, 75% of those individuals are over the age of 70. My mom's 90. She lives in an assisted living facility, so this is something I think about all the time. In the county, we have about 7,600 people who live in senior facilities or another, and they are very, very vulnerable. So the county has done a number of things, and it's very focused and will stay focused on that population. First off, the health officer did require that all employees in residence be, frequently tested for fever or any signs of respiratory illness. As the testing becomes more available, there will be a priority on testing people in the senior facilities. All the employees there, are under strict requirements to wear personal protective equipment. If a case breaks out, it has to be reported immediately. And we've had, unfortunately, a number, approximately a dozen senior facilities where cases have arisen. And in those instances, the county brings in extra resources to make sure, or do everything we can to make sure that the virus doesn't quickly spread within that facility, because we've all read about the tragedies in other parts of the Bay and other parts of the country. And, that's priority number one, is to avoid that. And then finally, another issue we also have been working on is when someone is infected and leaves a senior facility, goes to the hospital, then recovers, where does that person go? And in some cases, it's the senior facility where they lived, cannot really accommodate them. So we've established 5 other senior facilities that have kind of the capacity and the medical skills to work with people who are infected but do not need hospitalization. So really important area, and one that's we're going to have to stay focused on for a very long time.
And the last question is from Shirley. She asks, the shelter-in-place order has brought many hardships to residents and businesses in the county. What process and timeline is in place to get us released from lockdown?
Shirley, that is the question of the day that the health officers have been debating as we speak, because we've seen that the shelter-in-place has been effective in limiting the number of fatalities and limiting hospitalizations. But we also know that when you shut the economy down, we essentially shut down 95% of the economy. That brings on, terrible hardships for so many people. So there is a realization that we've reached the point where we'll soon have to do some kind of relaxation or rollback of these shelter-in-place orders. So it won't be just switched off in its entirety. But the health officers are trying to figure out how to phase it back. But it's a very delicate balance, because when it is phased back, there will be more infection, and you can't go too far, or else we'll be back where we started from. So it is an extraordinarily hard thing to figure out, but it is being debated, and there will be an effort to roll it back in the not too distant future.
All right, and thank you for those efforts. Well, I want to thank all the participants for just wonderful questions. But I have one last question for you, Supervisor. And what would have happened if there was no shelter-in-place order?
Well, again, I go back and look at the tragedy that occurred in the New York metropolitan area, and think that could have happened here. I mean, I remember really distinctly, we were about a week or so into the crisis, maybe towards the end of March, and the city of San Jose, one of their health officers, is speculating that there would be 2,000 to 16,000 deaths due to the virus. So we've avoided that, and we're really, again, grateful that everyone has rallied around the shelter-in-place order to the degree that we have. It has saved countless lives.
Right. Well, thank you for your leadership. And so where can our viewers go for more information?
Well, we have really comprehensive resources on the county's websites. If you go to the main county website, I don't know if those will be put up here, but www.smcgov.org, the first page will provide numerous resources that you can link to. In addition, we have a 211 telephone call center that people are welcome to call at any time. This is for information about the crisis and resources that are available. We have the capability of answering calls in 180 languages, which is pretty amazing. Don't call if you have an emergency, call 911 for that. But the website and 211 are the best places to start.
Great, thank you. And lastly, do you have a hopeful message as we move forward?
We as a county have come together in just the most remarkable way. All the cities and the county and the hospitals and have worked so closely together, and not only to slow the spread of the virus, but also to put in place programs to help everyone who have felt the economic pain of this shelter-in-place order. So our success to date gives me, great hope that we'll continue to, be leaders and serve our residents in the best ways possible.
Thank you. Speaking for myself, and I'm sure many viewers, thank you, and thank you for all our leaders for all of this wonderful work that you're doing in trying to keep us safe. So Supervisor Pine, thank you for taking time to join Take Notice today. We appreciate that you took questions asked by our public. This is a first for Take Notice. And thank you, viewers, for watching MCTV's Take Notice program. Please tell your family, friends, neighbors, and colleagues about Take Notice, and encourage them to watch and like us on YouTube and Facebook. You can also view Take Notice on Comcast Cable TV Channel 27 and AT&T Cable Channel 99. 5 days a week, 4 times a day. See you next time. We wish you have a very safe day.